What's going on, 40k theorists? Welcome back to Theory Hammer. Today we're going to have a little bit of a discussion here. It's going to be a little bit of a different video. We're going to have a discussion about the state of Warhammer 40k and 10th edition. This is going to be a series, I think, where I discuss the different editions of Warhammer, like what gave us lasting impressions from those editions, what set them apart, what made them unique, and we're going to start with the edition that we're in now, which is 10th. If that's something that you're interested in, exterminatus the like button, orbitably bombard, Nurgle's bell icon, subscribe to Theory Hammer, leave a comment down below letting us know what you think of the video and your opinions on the evolution of Warhammer, and check out our other videos as well. We got battle reports, tacticas, codex reviews, all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to complain about any specific faction in this video. Instead, we're just going to talk about why 40k is in the state that it is right now and how I deal and cope with it in case you're in the same boat as me. So in this video, we're going to be discussing some real actual issues with the game and ones that I think drive people away from the hobby. So you're really going to want to leave a comment down below and let me know if any of these points are ones that you can relate to or if anything I cover is completely fine and not an issue at all. Now, we need to start with some context so that we have a point of reference. And in case you guys didn't know, this is not the first edition of Warhammer. There have been other ones before it. And I think we need to discuss the other editions before we can really determine what the state of 40k is in 10th edition. So you clicked on this video, let's get down to it. What's your experience with 40k, with 10th edition? Do you guys love it? Do you hate it? Are you a seasoned tournament player? Are you just a casual player? Did you just get into the game? Tell me about what your experience is. Now, get it out in the open, right off the bat. The last few years of Warhammer have been a fucking dumpster fire, and the launch of 10th edition has been a ride off a cliff. For most players, this wasn't the experience, but for the competitive scene, shit was broke. Eldar were insane. Genestealers were insane. Custodians were insane. Imperial Knights were insane. And then basically every other army was like okay to bad. We'll get to this point later on. This is also a problem, but I gotta be completely honest. I've mostly enjoyed the games of 10th edition that I've played. That's probably because I don't take things as seriously as I once did. Like at the end of 8th edition, I ended it with a bang. I smoked bracket 4 at Nova, I won like countless locals. It was a great time for me. But then COVID hit, no one was really playing. Once COVID ended, most tournaments started doing events again, and I took a look at what I knew about 9th edition and the codexes that were out and just said, fucking no. There was so much to unpack here, guys. 10th edition is a dumpster fire, but to understand why, we have to jump into the DeLorean. In short, things were simpler in older editions, and I do not mean with rules, but I mean like the way that things were generally. And everyone always reminisces about old editions and the things that they liked and blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there was not as much of like a squeeze, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean. You feel the squeeze. So let me bring you back to the days of the glory days, which was like 5th edition. Right when I was getting decent at the game and I really started playing competitively. I started in 4th, but 5th edition is where I really started to pick up some skill. I remember there being some pretty strong lists out there. Like I remember Leaf Blower Guard, I remember Double Lash Oblit, I remember OG Nidzilla. That may have actually been 4th edition though, but I think they had a time in both, if I remember correctly. A variety of others, and those of you listening may remember what you ran back then and some of the things that you remembered seeing on the tables. Now, you have to understand, the game was played differently back then. Hell, I can't even remember how missions were scored. I want to say that towards the end of 5th, we were seeing like a primary, secondary, and tertiary method of winning. Because back then, the book itself, like the rulebook, didn't have like missions and stuff like it does now. They might have been like one very basic mission to get people started, but there weren't like organized missions for tournament play. And so people just kind of winged it and made up their own thing. It might have just been like a primary and a secondary. I don't know. I'm too lazy to get out my 5th edition rulebook anyway. Plus, like I said, there weren't any missions. I want to say that the game was won by scoring points for each objective that you were on at the end of the game, and if it was tied, you went to how many victory points you achieved by like destroying units, and if that was tied, then you went to like actual points destroyed. So you got like, objectives on the table, then how many like full units did you destroy, and then if there was still a tie, you actually calculated how many like points the models were worth and who had destroyed more. I do remember that towards the end of the edition, we did have some overpowered stuff like Grey Knights. Blood Angels weren't towards the end of the edition, but Grey Knights were for sure. 5th edition, my escapades through it, They deserve their own video. There probably is one, maybe there isn't, but there will be, so make sure to hit the bell icon. But suffice to say, this was the golden age for 40k, like Blood Angels and Transports. I think Thunderwolf Cavalry had just become a thing. You had Mech Guard, Double Lash Oblit. You had the army I played, which was the dual Land Raider Salamanders, Grey Knights, just lots of really good, cool shit. And there weren't a lot of factions back then either. Like, this was before demons were even a faction. Well, they might have come out just around this time. But there was no Votan, there was no Gene Stealer cult. There was like there was a lot of stuff that wasn't there. So then we have 6th edition. During this edition, you could ally like anything together, and I believe this is when Imperial Knights were released as a faction. They rolled through the first few tournaments, and they were like a pretty big deal from what I remember. People were not okay with their power level. These things were absolutely impossible to kill. I don't remember exactly how their damage worked, but I do remember them deleting units. Like, they would stomp stuff, and they would just die. Like, you would just pick up Nightbringers. Now, this was before the Age of Titans. I think this was before the age of even Baneblades or anything larger than like a Stormraven or a Land Raider for like a non-apocalypse game. And so you get these fucking things, and I'm surprised that they were not outright banned just because of like how good they are. So like, in my opinion, this is where GW really starts to squeeze their customers, because this is like the first time that we see an entire faction released that has just horrible imbalance. And it's a new faction that everyone wants to play because they're cool, and then GW starts to see the light. So, you know, you want to play 5 Supermen? All right, give us $750. And of course, these things sold faster than free beer. They were at every tournament everywhere, and all the tryhards were using them and just sweeping fucking locals with them. So 6th edition kind of changed everything in a way where GW became a lot more focused on money. But not only did we see the introduction of Titans on normal tables, we also saw the introduction of an ally system. They had allies before, I don't exactly remember how they worked, but in 6th edition, you could like ally a whole bunch of different stuff together. In 7th, it got even worse. But this really, really fucked shit up. I think this was before you could ally like literally anything with anything. But you could now expand the amount of options that you have like exponentially, because fuck balance. Now to me, this is just an obvious money grab. It's like, cool. You can ally this unit with this faction that eliminates both factions' weaknesses. Cool, bad game design. I'm gonna put my Hive Tyrant and ally it with my Necrons or something ridiculous. Like, I'll spend my money, good sir, here you go. And this is where things started to go off the rails, which like, it ramps up into 7th edition, which I'll speak about more in a second. But for 6th edition, I ran an army that would ally Centurions with Grey Knights, and then teleport around the board, killing 1 unit a turn. And this was in addition to some other random stuff, but that was the main meat of the army. It was like when Death Stars started becoming a thing. This is when things started to get weird. Imperial Knights didn't even like die from a round of shooting from this Death Star. So now like competitive play ramps up in a way where you start seeing things that are very min-maxed, but not min-maxed across a certain faction because you couldn't ally, min-maxed across all factions. And this created an environment where people had no incentive to not make absolutely busted fucking armies. So 7th edition rolls around, and Games Workshop goes, well, fuck. Let's let anyone ally with anyone. We'll call them desperate allies. Yeah, so like, if you really want, you can ally demons with their literal fucking arch enemy, the Grey Knights. They literally exist to destroy demons, dude. Like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Trying to get a Grey Knight to ally with a demon would be like trying to teach a dog calculus. Like, its brain is not wired to do that. You know, like 400 bad request, 404 not found, does not fucking compute, whatever you want to call it, that shit's impossible, and I hate you. God, GW pisses me off so much. Then GW's like, hey, we're gonna release formations throughout the edition. So what formations were, it's a bunch of models that you must take. You have to put all these models into the same detachment, into the same formation, and you're forced to take them. Basically what it said was, buy these models, win games. But you gotta like a lot of good shit for doing that, for taking all these forced units. Want to come in turn 1 with 2 Devastator squads and 2 Assault squads that can charge and shoot? You want free transports for your whole army in a Gladius formation? You want 1,400 points of free Tau drones and a literal endless supply of Seeker missiles with 5 Riptides and 3 units of Sisters of Silence in Rhinos? Yeah, I remember that cancer, Andrew Gagno. You want an AdMech Warcon that can kill anything in the game? Hey, so let's allow people to move fucking terrain around the table. I am not fucking joking. This was an actual thing you could do in this edition. In fact, I did this to people with my entire AdMech Warcon, including and Imperial Knight, and I just tabled people on turn 1, and I promptly won some brackets at Nova that year. So let's just skip to the end. I was not the only one who was like, what the fuck is going on here? People started leaving the hobby. So, brings us to 8th edition, and this is when the game is completely different. Weapons have a damage profile, the way AP worked was different, combat was totally changed, the game was just different. And it was different in the best way possible. This was somewhat of a return to a golden age for the game. Things were way more balanced in this edition when it first came out, like with the indexes, albeit with some exceptions. You know, there were some things that needed addressing, but it wasn't crazy, stupid broken. The one problem that did need addressing was how many of each unit you could take. And this was fixed pretty early on in 8th by what was known as the Rule of 3. We still have it today. And then GW did the GW thing and said, I'm gonna fuck this up. And GW creates Ynnari. And Ynnari are fucking disgusting. And then, whoops, oopsie again, GW creates a Castellan Imperial Knight, which can still ally with Imperial Guard and does. And this thing walks around winning games by itself. Remember when I said Imperial Knights would just roll over an army? This was just one Imperial Knight, allied with a bunch of Imperial Guard and Blood Angel like Smash Captains. The Imperial Knight, not kidding, killed 75% of your opponent's army by itself. So towards the end of 8th edition, we started seeing a similar problem where you have only a few things that are dominating top tables, but it's not because one book is stronger than another, it's because you can ally this shit together. The Castellan army wins bracket 1 at Nova like 2 years in a row. Maybe even 3. I think it was 2, but that's how strong it was. So 9th edition happens. I have to say, I didn't play much of 9th edition, mainly because of COVID. I did play it like with friends casually, but I didn't go to very many events. I did keep up with the release schedule that came out, and oh my fucking god, what a fucking shit show. Admech come out, outrageously OP and need to get nerfed. Tau come out, outrageously OP and need to get nerfed. Custodes come out. By the way, I have no idea if this is in the right order, but guess what? Insanely OP and needed a nerf. Hey, check out this new race. It's called the Leagues of Votann. Guess what? They're insanely OP and they got a day 1 nerf and they were still insanely OP, dude. Like, sisters come out, insanely OP. Okay, but check this out, right? Everyone bought a bunch of this shit when the armies dropped, and then GW nerfed it all and gave them the middle finger. And this is what happened with like every index that came out in 9th edition up until the point where things were coming full circle, and the nerfs like to Tau and the Admech were completely reversed and like back to what they were when they first came out. They just like couldn't get anything right. And then after dropping Votann and Astra Militarum, GW was like, well, fuck that, new edition time. All your codices are invalid. But you can go out and buy new shit now. That's what you wanted to do, right? We are used to this kind of shit at this point, but it's like not cool. 9th edition can be summed up with this. Make OP shit, get people to buy it, and then pretend you did nothing wrong and fix the units. Like, it's so obvious and shitty, and I'm surprised people don't talk about it more, let alone the fact that their prices have gone up way more than inflation has, which is a topic for another video, but like, whatever. Now, on another note, this was the first time that they were really going ham on updating things. There were some updates in 8th edition as well, but not on like a scheduled thing like this. So I'm just sitting back here with a bag of popcorn being like, damn, they really be fucking this up, huh? Insane rules on each release, getting people to buy shit, scramble to get things fixed with rules and points updates. Like, what pieces of shit? I'm glad I didn't play this edition. Now, I know I've been rambling a lot about other editions, besides 10th, but like I said in the beginning, that's because I'm illustrating that things have been in flux for a while, and veteran sergeants like myself have been through the shit, and we know where Warhammer came from. The problem now is very simple. It's just fucking exhausting. 9th edition comes, and we start seeing a slide in balance again. Just about every codex that comes out is insane, and the company who created it has to day 1 patch it. Completely outside of that, 9th edition seems fine at first, but something about the gameplay from 8th edition is different. It's a lot more of a trading game rather than what I would call a strategy game. The way that 9th edition forced players to play the game made it so that their armies had really durable units that would just sit on objectives and score points turn by turn. Your opponent is incentivized to move their units up to counter their opponent and take the points back, but like, where's the strategy there? You lose a lot of it. Fundamentally, if you want to win the game, you gotta move your army in certain directions. Like, the game dictates the way that people play it. 9th edition, 10th edition, they both force you to play by placing things in positions where they're basically guaranteed to die. Some previous editions were too simple with the way that you would score points on objectives at the end of the game, and I get that. I'm not saying that those were perfect either. But once we got into editions like 8th, especially in events, where you would pick certain secondaries and they were designed to be difficult, and people were kind of building armies around secondaries that people couldn't pick certain ones against them, it was hard to max secondaries in that time. Even primaries sometime as well. So we get to 8th edition, we're picking our primaries, we're picking our secondaries, and I think that's where the perfect mix is. Certain armies could be built to play for endgame, or certain armies could be built to allow for an accumulation style, and you didn't have to worry about which one it was because you built your army to what your playstyle was. Both were valid, both had their benefits, their drawbacks. The Imperial Guard army that I talked about that won Nova in 8th edition for like 2 or 3 years in a row, every time I played against that army, those people played accumulation, and I always played endgame. So I think that worked. Certain armies can be built to play for the endgame, or certain armies can be built to play for accumulation. Like, both were valid, like I said. So 9th edition took this away, ate it, shit it out, and gave you a completely different version of what the game was. You pick the same secondaries because you don't need to interact with your opponent. You play the game the same way by moving up to the middle, getting the objectives for a turn, etc., etc. And like, some people like it, but they're wrong, and they should hate it because it sucks. But, you know, I'm just kidding. But you want to play it up like, okay, I run to the objectives and accumulate points. Great. I want you to play that way. But I don't want to play that way myself. I want to play, I let you accumulate points while I grind you down, and then I get my points at the end of the game. So I skipped 9th edition entirely. I played a few games, you know, I won some, I lost some, but who fucking cares, right? I went, damn, like, each mission's the same. Let's see what tournaments do. And they didn't do shit. I kind of expected tournament circuits to come up with their own missions or to kind of change things a little bit because historically they always have. But nope, they just went with it and played the missions right out of the book from GW. Hey, now we all have secondaries in our codexes. That's pretty cool, right? Each codex gets secondaries? Yeah, except the problem there is that some books have pretty shitty secondaries and other ones have auto-achievable ones. Like, dude, when World Eaters came out, their secondaries were insane. Like, be on an objective and die. Like, cool, that's easy. Like, what the fuck? You know what else sucked about 9th? I know. Your army would get a new codex, and then it would be busted, which would incentivize you to paint your army of shame, and by the time you finished, GW would patch that shit. And by patch it, I mean essentially delete your army list. What else? Like, how about the legending of units? That's cool, right? Now I gotta be honest with that one. That is understandable, because some of that shit is old as fuck, and frankly, just delete it. Just get rid of it, make the range smaller, more compact. Like, when you have 1,500 sets, like, I can understand wanting to make the range smaller, and anybody who thinks that they can make all models forever, it doesn't scale. Like, you can't scale that, so that's just not how it works. Like, you're just not gonna do that. Anyway, let's talk about 10th edition. You know, the first thing I gotta say about the game is that it is rather balanced right now. It's actually not perfect, but it is pretty balanced. You know, I gotta give credit where credit's due, and it did take a lot of patching and a lot of tweaking to get to this state, but otherwise, I'm just gonna rip the Band-Aid off and start with what I think is the biggest glaring issue of Warhammer, especially if you are new to the game and or, you know, specifically one of those who plays competitively, and we already talked about it, which is that the first thing you must know and understand in your soul is that you're caught in a hamster wheel, a very expensive hamster wheel. Units that are good become bad, units that are bad become good, hell, even entire factions become good and others become bad. And if you're like me, you ideally want to play with optimized lists because you like winning and you like min-maxing, and so you're going to be spending money constantly on this game if you play it competitively. And depending on your army and a few other factors, it's going to cost you a lot of money. But that will definitely come up along the way anyway, so let's just move past that and first take a look at what has happened already in this edition. Less than a year, at least at the time of recording, has passed, and we have seen a complete overhaul of the core rules with changes to devastating wounds, free strats on battle tactics only, changes to towering, and that's just to name a few. Eldar have been nerfed like 3 or 4 times. Custodies have given us whiplash. They have a 4 Feeling of Pain versus dev wounds and then lose it because the dev wounds changed, and then they got it back for like 2 months, and then they lost it again. And these are just a few examples, and this is just to illustrate the first of many problems, number one of which is that GW has no idea what they're doing, or worse, they don't care. And so you run into this problem where you buy models because they're good, you spend time building them, painting them, and then a few weeks after you've gotten them on the table, GW changes something that makes the army no longer optimized, and so you change it. And so you go, oh great, now the X whatever unit is good, like, so I guess I'm gonna get those, and you spend time building it, and you spend time painting it, and then GW changes something, and your army's no longer optimized. Obviously, I may be projecting a bit here. So that's the hamster wheel, like the never-ending cycle of just being more or less forced to spend money on new models, and the legitimate time constraint it can take on you. Unless you're wealthy enough to like get things commission painted all the time, which personally I'm not, then this just isn't an option. It's a little frustrating, to be completely honest. It is a little frustrating to invest your time and money into something with the intent to play with optimization, but the goalpost is always moving, or at least moving at a faster pace than I would like. Like, I don't mind things being updated, but when they're updated too quickly, it's hard to keep up, and I'm sure some of you understand what I mean there. And this takes me to another point, which basically just boils down to get it fucking right the first time. Like, this isn't rocket science, guys. So that's the hamster wheel. This idea is not new, although it was not always something that was like a thing. Like back in the day around 5th edition, new codexes would come out, you know, sometimes. They'd usually be better than expected, and the meta would just adjust. No one would have to worry about like points being adjusted or core rules being changed or any of that shit. And I'm not necessarily saying that that was a good thing or that it was better, so let me be crystal fucking clear about that, but I am saying that the mentality is different. You got what you got, and the meta just adjusted to it. The obvious problem here is that things really did need balancing that didn't get balanced. But again, you know, get it right the first fucking time. So, that brings us to meta chasing, right? This is something that was big back in like 6th edition, 7th edition, and then since then. This is when GW began to realize that OP shit made them more money. For those of you who don't know, meta chasing is pretty simple. Some new hot things come out, so you bought it. And then the next new hot thing came out, and so you bought it. And the true shills sold their no longer top tier meta army and used the money to buy their new hottest army. And you did this for several editions until you looked at your expenses for the last 6 years and you realized you spent all your savings on plastic toy soldiers. So meta chasing started out in 5th, has not slowed since. I need to slow my speaking because I'm getting too excited. But it was different back then because the points stayed the same. So you'd get entire new armies instead of new units, except I didn't do that, and I kept everything that I ever purchased, except for a few things, and I did not ever sell stuff for the new hotness. But when 6th edition came out, 7th edition happened, I was buying up models like crazy, just so I could put down whatever was OP at the time, because I was really into the competitive scene. And you could also ally things as well, so I was buying stuff from other armies and giving GW all my money. Once 8th edition hit, I owned a good chunk of models that I was able to just kind of keep using into that edition. But then 9th edition happened, and oh my god, so many armies and factions changed so quickly it made my head spin. And I just imagined the work it would take to get the, you know, whatever models I needed for each faction up to par. And then seeing how quickly a lot of armies were reined in, not that it was a bad thing in most situations, but like, damn GW, if you want to release something broken, don't make it that broken. Make it like strong but counterable. And so the ramp up of meta chasing is not something that I can afford to do anymore. And the system of meta chasing has changed, I think. It used to be that you bought your dumb OP army and you sold your no longer dumb OP army, and that is still a thing for a lot of people. For me, I just have so many different factions, like all but a few. So for me, it's more like buy whatever units are most optimized at the time for whatever army I'm trying to main. If I have an optimized list, but then the rules and points are changed, and instead of having to switch armies entirely, I can just buy new models for armies that I already play. And that's where we hit another roadblock in the 10th edition is Garbage Saga. If you're like me, you want to win, then it behooves you to have a second, maybe even a third, army from different factions. And this is to combat the Custodes issue, where your army drops in 10th, and it's like trying to fight an army of superheroes, and then with the stroke of a key, it becomes a goddamn clown show, and then back to superheroes, and then back to clown show. And in most cases, like this, where entire armies are just totally shafted, it's nice to have a second or even third, or more, potentially, armies to fall back on, but therein lies the problem. Now you have to spend X more dollars on a new army, and spend X more dollars on specific units that will inevitably become good again, and it's just, you know, as a side note, this is a great reason not to sell things if you plan to like pick up a faction one day. Just keep it. If stuff's bad now, I can guarantee you that it will become good in the future, because Games Workshop wants to sell it, and because you're caught in the hamster wheel, you see. It's a wheel. It's a circular buying pattern where you keep wanting the new shiny thing. It's like a thing that keeps spinning in place with no real endpoint. I'll tell you guys a little story from back in 7th edition. Back in 7th edition, there were these things called formations, like I mentioned before. So each formation forced you to play with certain units, but in doing so, those units got special rules that they didn't otherwise have. So back in 6th edition, my dumbass looked at my 15 piranhas that I had, and I went, you know, these things have been bad forever. I'm gonna sell these pieces of shit. And so I did. And then a few years later, Tau just happened to get a detachment where running 15 piranhas was fucking busted. Let me just explain this one more time. Each one of those things had 2 drones that could detach. So drones used to be their own unit, and you could attach drones like embarked guys. So I drop off 30 drones. And then each of those piranhas could take 2 seeker missiles. So now we're looking at 30 seeker missiles that you could shoot in one turn. And seeker missiles have always, and are still to this day, one shot a game. Except no they aren't, because this detachment gave piranhas a rule that allowed them to leave the table and come back on next turn. And guess what happened when they came back on? They came back with drones and missiles. I did the math at the time, and it was like 1,400 free points that you got from this detachment alone. And this was a list that had 5 Riptides, because there was no rule of 3, and then 3 units of Sisters of Silence in like silent rhinos. You could ally anything together. You had fucking Grey Knight summoning demons. This was stupid, but you would just win the game. Like, it was close to unbeatable, and it won a GT actually that I'd placed 3rd in with the AdMech Warcon. So I was there and I witnessed it. One of my friends actually played against it on Game 5 and lost. So I have other examples of this happening where I've sold models and regretted it. And so the moral of the story is just don't sell your shit. Box it up, it'll become good again one day, especially now with the way that GW seems to make units that don't sell very well good at some point. And so that brings us to problem number something, the next one. And the next problem is that GW knows when some units are OP, and they will make certain things OP just to sell the models themselves. And I mean, who can blame them? They do exist to make money after all. But just to hammer home that hamster wheel concept, that's going to be part of it. So separately, when they do make something really OP, it fucking sells out, like instantly. Try to buy Mega Knobs right now, okay? So you either end up having to source a print file, or you have to pay like 2 to 3 times the price on eBay. So you have this frustrating cycle where GW will change something, make a new thing, and then suddenly, like, random units just sell out for months, and so you either have to print them or go to eBay. We're now going to change gears here, and we're going to talk about how many rules they are, because there's a fucking lot. Now, first off, let's do some theory hammer, shall we? There's 27 factions. Let's say each one gets 5 detachments, which we know isn't the case because some have 8, some have 4, some have somewhere in between. So we're going to average it at 5. Okay, that's 135 possible detachments. Each one of them has 6 strats. That's 810 strats. 135 possible detachments with 4 enhancements is 540 enhancements. For someone who wants to be on the competitive scene, for someone like me, you've got to memorize 1,500 different things between the detachment rules, like each enhancement and each stratagem. I'm pretty sure a taxi driver in London has to study less. And for those of you who don't know, taxi drivers in London are expected to know like the name and location of every street, and they take a test on it. Like, you have to do more studying than that to play a fucking toy soldier game. When we say you need to get your Warhammer PhD, this is what we mean. We mean like learning, studying, and understanding 1,500 different rules so that you can understand the entirety of the game and its different interactions. And on top of this, you have to memorize the datasheet rules for each unit that you're using, and for each unit that your opponent uses, because if you're playing competitively, you need to know what it does. So getting into 40k competitively is not for the faint of heart, and it's not something that you can do overnight, especially if you're new to the game. Like, even for seasoned players like me, who have been playing since birth practically, we have to entirely relearn the game every fucking edition. The rules are a mess. Like, speaking of too many rules, Warhammer 40k 10th edition has a designer's commentary. It's 20 pages long. That's almost as long as the actual core rules, like the how to play in the game section, like not including what dice are, missions, that kind of stuff. I'm talking like how to move, how to shoot, how to combat. Yeah, the fucking rules commentary is almost as long as the core rules. So what do we think about 10th edition and Games Workshop? What's the conclusion here? It sucks. I hate the RNG of the tactical decks. There's already enough RNG in the game with dice. Why do you need to add in a deck of cards that you need to shuffle and shit each game? It gives you a lot of options though. I mean, you can go fixed, which is fine, but then you have to build lists around that, and I have made armies for fixed. I think I prefer it because of the extra RNG of the decks. It just limits you a lot because you need to run certain units dedicated to doing your fixed secondaries. Like, certain armies can do this well, like Black Templar, but it's not an option for other things like Imperial Knights. Like, you're not gonna go with fixed. And if your opponent's army is built like shit, then perhaps you can. But something like Imperial Knights, you're not gonna have any way to reliably do fixed secondaries in the GT. I hate that you're forced to put units into places where they're guaranteed to die. And this really, really bugs me about the edition. I'm a cagey player, and I always have been. I don't like to commit until I have to, and in 10th edition, you have to commit early in the game in order to start scoring primary points. Like, I think there needs to be a primary system where each player can choose a version of the primary mission, kind of like how you can choose to play fixed secondaries or how you choose a gambit. Like, do something like that for the primary. Like, have 2 options that you have to reveal to each other or something. Like, I don't know. We can talk about that in a different video. Let me know what you guys think, but something's got to change with primary. Next problem is that going first sucks in a lot of missions. Here's my problem with going first. I go first, so I want to try to score primary points on my second command phase, so I move units onto the objectives. I don't have the opportunity to make a real dent in my opponent's army unless they deploy like shit and give me angles to things, which you have to assume they're not going to do. Now, my opponent then reacts, blows things off objectives. Remember, I didn't get the opportunity to do that. Really, I didn't even get a chance to really target them at all, let alone blow them off objectives, even though I went first. Going first sucks because it's hard to hit your opponent first, but you also want to get the points, so you want to move things onto the middle objectives, in places where they're guaranteed to die. Your opponent then follows through with that guarantee and kills those units, so I really am simplifying this because you can get onto objectives and you can be relatively safe, you can have durable units on there, things that are hard to remove, but the point remains the same, which is that you get to go first, but your opponent actually gets to go first. How the fuck did we get to a place where going first in a turn-based tabletop war game is not what you want? Like, it's just so fucking backwards. It's just so fucking backwards, dude. And I also dislike the person going first getting the opportunity to just blast their opponent off the table as well. But with how the terrain is in 10th edition, it's really easy to hide your valuable units on turn 1. So if missions weren't so fucking stupid, then this would be fine. This has just been a thing in 40k for a long time, like just the disparagement between going first and second. The difference is that I was not forced to put units into bad positions on turn 1, so the fact that you were hiding wasn't as consequential. There's a whole discussion about here about like staging that I'm gonna leave for a tips and tricks video, but more or less, your other option here is to just skip getting primary on turn 2 and just let your opponent react and move on their turn 1, which is a viable option, but you're kind of playing with fire there. You better hit them so fucking hard in the next couple of turns that skipping primary on turn 2 was the right call. And it's just not going to be obvious what the right move is that early on in the game, like before your opponent has even taken their turn. Basically wasting your first turn and hiding, which is also fucked because the person going second gets to score primary at the end of the 5th turn. So next up, fuck the command phase. Literally fuck the command phase. No rules should proc in the command phase. It's too hard to set up certain things when they trigger at this time. You want to repair your Dreadnought? Well, go fuck yourself because it charged and now you're over 3 inches away from the Tech Marine. Well, why didn't you just position your Tech Marine where it was, you know, within 3 inches of the Dread when it ended its charge? Like crazy, I didn't think about that, man. Oh wait, I did actually. I decided I didn't want my Tech Marine that cost 90 points with giving lethal hits auras or something important, getting within 12 inches of the enemy units and dying for no reason. Like, just make it happen in the fucking movement phase. There are so many command phase abilities where it's like, be in a good position at the start of your turn, after your opponent has bent you over, and will give you some ability. Here's what I say. Delete the fucking command phase. It's pointless. Just use the movement phase. Okay, so now we have terrain. Terrain gives me aids. You ever seen a tank roll through a building in a war zone? Yeah, so why the fuck can't my vehicles move through walls? You ever seen a Land Raider? It's fucking huge. It's like the size of my house. I don't know, have their movement or something. Make them take D3 mortals, do fucking anything so that my Bane Blade is not literally stuck inside my deployment zone, depending on the terrain setup. It seems bad when supported models are basically useless because you fucked up how terrain works. Alright, next deployment. I deploy a unit, you deploy a unit. Man, fuck that shit. Not only does it basically not change anything on where I actually end up deploying, it takes forever. Just drop the entire army at once and then I'll do the same. Now I realize this introduces other issues, like one person being able to put down all their scouts before their opponent, which makes the opponent's scouts somewhat useless at that point, or infiltrators, potentially. But okay, fine, take that into consideration. Like, write the rules where both things work. Like, some way to have both people place their scouts fairly so that you drop one at a time and then when it comes to the rest of your army, you drop it all at once. I don't know, some sort of compromise. Battle Shock. Delete this useless fucking rule. It's been 10 editions and it's always been terrible. Like, just delete it. I can say with absolute certainty, no one will miss Battle Shock. Not even Chaos Knight players. All right, weapons having a ballistic skill. All right, I'm just nitpicking at this point. But is it really simpler that each weapon has a ballistic skill instead of it just being on the model's profile? The answer is no. There's no fucking way you can convince me that remembering one value for the model is harder than remembering 10 values for the different weapons that our unit is equipped with. Like, you had it right before, guys. My unit has ballistic skill, whatever, not each gun. Like, is it really simpler to print 3+ on all of the weapons except for one, which is a 4+, rather than having some universal special rule for heavy weapons being -1 to hit unless you stay still, in which case they're +1 to hit? It seems pretty fucking easy to me. Like, my unit's ballistic skill 3, cool. This weapon's heavy. Did it move? No. Okay, it's +1 to hit. It moved? Okay, I guess it's -1 to hit. So codexes, they vary wildly in power. We get shit like Admech and Necrons, Custodies and Orcs. I forget what came out with Dark Angels, but like, Dark Angels were bad. Admech are total shit, except for 1 detachment. Necrons are insane in 2 detachments. Custodies have been a balanced nightmare apparently for GW, and now their codex is pretty garbage, but it's probably actually fine. Orcs just got better, and they were already super duper strong. The amount of time it takes to play the game. This is going to be something I touch on in other videos in the series when we get to other editions, but just in case you guys thought that a game of Warhammer was simpler and faster, it's not. It's literally not. Games used to be 5 to 7 turns, usually 6, and in some editions, like some tournament circuits, it was like a hard 6. There were many times when I would play 7-turn games in 2.5 hours in older editions. Generally agreed upon that Warhammer is simpler than it has been in the past, but I challenge that. Is it really simpler? I'm allotted an additional 30 minutes to play a game that lasts 1 less turn, so something seems wrong to me there. Coherency. Just fuck this noise entirely. There was absolutely no reason to change it to 2 inches of 2 models when the unit size gets too large. You can still create conga lines, so like, what the fuck was the point of this? It just makes microing more complicated because it's just another thing you have to think about when you're moving your unit around and such. It's just needlessly restrictive. But anyway, you know, I have a million things I could rant about, so let's move on here, finish up the video, and talk about the things that I think 10th edition gets right. Let's end off on a lighter note here and discuss what I think that it does well. You see, I leave these until the end so that everyone's already left their negative comments. 10th edition has Mortal Wound spam reined in. This is great, because in other editions, mainly 8th and 9th, Mortal Wound spam was a problem. So this has been reined in. Generally, balance is better. GW does make an effort to balance the game with patches, points updates. As much as I hate them for not getting it right the first time, I really can't complain when they go out of their way to try to fix something. And I think I and the rest of us do appreciate it. Like, it's like when Bethesda releases Fallout 76, you know, I appreciate you adding NPCs to the game, you know, finishing it, and I'm a bit scorned that you thought you could get away with releasing it before it was finished in the first fucking place, but hey, you fixed it, and I hate you less. So, vehicles have finally been realized in this edition. I love that. Vehicles, in other editions, they just didn't feel right. And a lot of other units as well, like Terminators, being impossible to kill. Like, back in the day, vehicles had armor values, and I'm not even going to get into how that worked, but basically when 8th edition came along, they just said, nah, they actually have toughness like everything else, and it was so much simpler. The problem was that the toughness and the strength chart was not as stretched out as it is in 10th, so vehicles with toughness 8, which is basically as high as it went with very few exceptions, they could still get hit really hard because they became almost too tough if they went past T8. It was a weird thing. So when the system of toughness was like it was in 9th and 8th, it just wasn't optimized. But now we see tanks, vehicles, even transports with a really high toughness. And they really should, because, you know, you need an actual anti-tank weapon to be effective against them. So bravo there. Blast weapons. These actually feel like blast weapons. While I do miss templates, I do like the simplification of blast weapons in 40k. I especially like how they are good against large hordes of units. Blast in other editions were lame as fuck, and you can only get shots if you're gonna have 10 guys or more. I know it was worse at least. I could probably think of more things. I could give myself more time here, but as I sit here writing this and thinking about what I want to say, I really can't think of much more that I like about 10th edition, and I really, really want to stress that I did not get this feeling before when new editions came out. And some of those editions, like 8th, completely changed the core rules of the game. But it still felt like Warhammer. It still felt like there was strategy and tactics, and just because that was the case, didn't make it bad. On the contrary, in fact, it was probably one of the best editions of all time. So make sure to smash Norgle's bell icon, that way you don't miss my 8th edition video where I'm basically just gonna praise it the entire time. And so I'm not someone who's adverse to change or new things, although we do kind of resist change to some degree, and we tend to think about things we've lost rather than things we've gained, but this is different. 9th edition and 10th edition are just giving me a different vibe. Like, the game has just lost its luster now. And it's purely because of how 10th edition missions are constructed, how you play them to win. Like, I'm thrilled we're getting a new series, or a new set of missions with Pariah Nexus. So this is being filmed before that comes out. It's entirely possible that I just find the game harder to win based on the strategy I've learned from past, older, different rule sets that are just not applicable to 10th edition play. Having to like unlearn and relearn a new game every few years is exhausting. Like, I'm an awful player when a new edition comes out. I feel like I'm starting at square one, and all of the pride that I had and all of the skill that I gained is gone and turned into frustration that I need to start over again. If we think about anything else in life, played an instrument, learning a craft, learning some new system, the basis of that shit doesn't change. You're not buying a new instrument every 3 years and mastering that. You keep playing the same instrument until you master it, and then if you feel like it, you pick up a new instrument. There's no force that makes you change your instrument every 3 years, Is that a bad comparison? You get better and better the longer you do it. At least with something like Magic, the rules don't change. And so the things that I learned in the past are still applicable. Not with 40k. Remember when I was good? Can I take that experience with me into this new edition and remain at higher skill levels? Or will I have to relearn this as if I'm a new player because things are so wildly different? Some rule sets just click with some people, and some rule sets just don't. A rule set that I found easy, you may have found difficult. Can anything that I learned last edition be applied here? Or do I need to rethink why I'm putting a unit in a certain place? I think there is honestly a little bit of frustration here as well, but it has nothing to do with any edition. This is just more of a KevBot personal thing, and it basically just boils down to this, which is that everyone performs different, better, worse, depending on the current core rules. I've definitely found success with certain editions and not so much with others. Like, I was a rock star in 5th edition. I basically won every local I went to. I went to the second round of Du Bois 2 years in a row. Too young to travel to round 3. I was also really good in 8th. I remember playing Sasha for the first time, taking him down. I'm top 50 at Nova, won bracket 4, a lot of locals. When it came to other editions, I was kind of all over the place. Like 6th and 7th, really didn't have good showings in those editions. I'd go to GTs and just get totally shit on. So it was a bit all over the place for me. And I just feel like a reset button each time a new edition comes out, at least for me, is something that is bad about the game. I'd really like to see where we could get to if the core rules just didn't change. Like, when it comes to 10th, I'm okay. I'm not amazing, I'm not horrible. This feels partially because I hate the edition, I don't care. I feel like I've kind of been there, done that. Like, I've proved to myself that I can play this game at a high level, and I've also proved to myself that I can be measured and I can recognize and admit when edition is just not something I can get behind. So 10th edition is a fucking mess, yo. Are there some good things? Of course. Are there some bad things? Absolutely. But here's the thing, guys. 40k is more of a lifestyle, At least for people like us. Like, we have entire rooms in our house dedicated to this game. Each of us is gonna have a different opinion here. Some of you are gonna love 10th edition from top to bottom, and I love that, sincerely. I would go as far to say that I'm truly envious. But some of you are gonna hate 10th edition from top to bottom, kinda like me. And we complain about these things because we love them, because we wanna see them become better. And while we may not always agree on what the right call should be, we're all here because we just have an undying passion for toy soldiers. And so I think I'm gonna stop there, because if I say anything else negative, I may summon a demon. I'm going to leave you guys, and hopefully gals, with that. So to recap, 5th edition, one of the best editions. 6th edition, very forgettable. 7th edition, almost killed Games Workshop. 8th edition, also the best edition. S tier with 5th. 9th edition, COVID happened and every fucking codex was insanely OP. 10th edition sucks. I hate this game. I love this game. And Grey Knights would never fucking ally with demons. Thanks for making it to the end here, guys. You guys are fucking great. Exterminatus that like button, call down an orbital bombardment on Nurgle's bell icon, subscribe to Theory Hammer, leave a comment, check out our other videos as well. Funk 10th edition, and I'll see you awesome 40k theorists next time.